It's always a good idea to keep the bigger picture in mind in terms of what the indices are doing or even exchanges on a grand scale so that you actually know the bigger picture and where things are going. And this is a very interesting market that way. It's a corrective market on the upside since 2009. It's just one of these very interesting kind of B wave things, certainly in the NYSE side of the equation. But you need to, because this market, as I've said very many times before, in my phrase of all the same market, which actually Bob Prechter came up with, is that everything is moving in tandem. And this is, you can see this right across the world. For example, DAX is moving virtually the same as the S&P 500 in terms of the wave we're in right now, and this is in June 2020. And so this is happening right across the world as debt is getting deleveraged. And this is why a lot of time people are asking me about cycles. Cycles really aren't working all that well. I'll tell you what is working. It seems to be eclipses and the moon and that sort of thing on a smaller scale. But you need to keep everything, like the larger picture, in your mind, because with everything moving in tandem, you kind of need to know where everything is and what they're doing because it tells you whether you're on track or not. So I thought just tonight, I'm not going to talk about the dollar, but really the dollar, the US dollar, because it's the reserve currency and everything is based on it, is really in charge. And it's going into deflation, a deflationary environment. And that's where things are going. And so gold is going to go down, for example. And if you knew that the dollar was going to go up, then, that would make sense. And we're coming to the end of the line in terms of the indexes and indices and also exchanges. And so here's the NDX. And I wanted to start here because, I get the occasional email where somebody's just looking at, for example, ES, which is the futures for the S&P 500, and sort of questioning why we have this great big wave up. And isn't it going to go to a new high? And isn't it a motive wave and all of this kind of stuff? And, they don't look around at the different indices and really understand what's going on. So this is the NDX, and it's in what I would call an expanding diagonal. And an expanding diagonal has got trend lines that diverge. They're a little bit different than a regular ending diagonal. An ending expanding diagonal is that different because in an ending diagonal, your trend lines have to converge. And so they get tighter as they go towards the end. In an ending expanding, they diverge. And the final wave only goes up to the upper trend line. It never does a throw over, which an ending diagonal does. So that's what we seem to have here. And it has the ABC third wave, which is kind of, you can always tell an ending diagonal by that wave. I always do. And that's one of the key things you need to keep in mind. All the waves need to be in threes. And that's a key element of what I'm going to talk about right now, because this wave is in three. This wave is very obviously in three. This wave here, the D or the fourth leg, came down in three. And now we have this wave up, which is the final wave of the ending expanding diagonal, but it's in five waves. So it can't be in five waves. It needs to be in three waves. So it needs a B wave, and then it needs a final C wave. And so I'm expecting, because we've got the five waves up now and we're just at that point where things are going to turn, I'm looking for a three-wave B wave on the downside. And then I'm looking for, most likely, well, it could either be a five-waver to the upside or it could be a three-waver. It really doesn't matter. But the overall pattern has to be a three, and that ends off the ending expanding diagonal, and that then becomes the top of the market, and it will go up and hit this trend line, and then everything is going to collapse, as I've been saying. So you can see from this, there's one more down and one more up. Okay, so that's the NDX. Now, if you go over to the S&P 500, the S&P 500 has to move in conjunction with it in a similar manner. And I've shown this chart many times before. This is the same 2-day chart as I showed you with the NDX, but it's got a different pattern. This would be what a lot of people would refer to as a megaphone or a a broadening top. And in Elliott wave, you might call it an expanding triangle. And it looks like this. Now, I have a little bit of a challenge or a problem with the ending expanding diagonal, or sorry, the expanding triangle in the book, because sometimes you get these things and they just end here. They're not continuations, they're actually ending waves. In the book, it shows a wave coming down and then you end up going through the bottom here. This one is actually going to end the process. So I've seen a lot of these. Maybe we need to have a broadening top or just another explanation that says these can also be ending patterns. But here's our third and fourth wave, and then you've got an ABC working into the A wave, which is what you need. So there's your A wave, 3 waves down. This wave up, of course, the C wave is 3 waves up. And this wave, I didn't mark it, but this is the same as the NDX. It's 3 waves down. It's an ABC. And then we have this wave up that kind of looks like 5 waves, but in actual fact, I mark it as corrective. There's an extra wave in here, and it's actually an A, B, and a 5 waver on the upside. But it could be 5 waves because we need to end up here with a better, because this is an ABC, but it doesn't look like one, and it needs to look like one. So we've got an ABC wave coming down to this trend line here is what I'm expecting as the next move. And that would be similar to what is happening in the NDX. It's going to go down lower than it is in the NDX, because the NDX, I only expect it to come down, well, pretty far, but it's not going to come down as far as this one, and then you need another wave up in to make that the 5th wave. And in this case, in the S&P 500, I'm expecting a wave all the way down here in 3 waves, most likely to the trend line, and then another wave up. This needs to be in 3 waves up to finish the E leg, and then this is going to collapse. So one more wave down and one more wave up. So it matches the NDX. It's doing the same thing, but they're in different patterns. And this sort of explains the bigger picture, and maybe that will settle some people that say, oh, this is going to happen and that's going to happen. And a lot of people just look at one exchange or one index, and you can't do that. You certainly can't do it in this market. You need to know what everything's doing. And of course, this works in conjunction with what I expect to see happen in the US dollar, and in particular the DXY, which is the US dollar index. So it all works as far as I'm concerned, and we're just waiting. This is a huge wave to the upside, and we're going to get a huge wave to the downside, just as we are in the NDX, and then a huge final wave up to the upside, which is going to, in this case, give us a new high. But this also does not go above the trend line. Sometimes it comes a little short, but the final wave will not get up to the trend line, and then of course we'll get the market collapsing to the downside. And that's taking a look at those 2 indices, and maybe that just, keep that in mind in terms of where we're going and why things are doing what they're doing.